State.
The facts of Iraq are now beyond dispute. More than 3,000 American soldiers killed. Iraqi deaths in the hundreds of thousands. A civil war that just keeps getting worse. And a U.S. president who seems to be watching it through a looking glass.
We will stay the course. We will help this young Iraqi democracy succeed. And victory in Iraq will be a major ideological triumph in the struggle of the 21st century. In this battle, we have fought for the cause of liberty.
Even after all that's happened, you can still find the administration's version of the war right here at the WhiteHouse.gov website, a kind of repository of alternative reality from the past 4 years, where white is black.
The Iraqi regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised.
Where down is up.
The year 2005 will be recorded as a turning point in the history of Iraq, the history of the Middle East, and the history of freedom.
Where the end is really the beginning.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Blame faulty intelligence, wishful thinking, or willful deception. It's the official record of how the United States has systematically sold and sustained an unwise and ultimately disastrous war.
Because of you, our nation is more secure. Because of you, the tyrant has fallen and Iraq is free.
Hello, I'm Bob McEwen. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. American presidents lie for many reasons. Richard Nixon did it during Watergate to try to save his presidency. Bill Clinton lied about Monica Lewinsky to try to salvage his reputation, maybe his marriage. But when presidents don't tell the truth about war, as has consistently been the case with George W. Bush, the public has every right to ask, are they lying to protect the country or lying to protect themselves? Since the U.S.-led invasion 4 years ago, here at the Fifth Estate, we've covered Iraq and the war on terror from virtually every angle. The military, the media, intelligence, politics, revealing aspects of the story that you didn't find anywhere else. Now, we'll put all of that together to reveal what was true, what was not, and how those false or misleading words and ideas have left Iraq, and arguably the world, far more dangerous places than they were before. And as we watch that same pattern emerge again, this time in White House statements about Iran, its support of terrorism, and its nuclear threat, it's worth considering how we got to where we are today, the lies that led to war. It all started with what seemed a simple statement.
For America, 9/11 was more than a tragedy. It changed the way we look at the world.
That soon became conventional wisdom. Of course, it's not that the terrible events of September 11th, 2001 didn't change a great deal. Obviously, they did.
I can hear you!
At least at first, they galvanized the American people in support of their president.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
But 9/11 also disguised the fact that the seeds of the Iraq War were planted long before the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
I wish I could tell you it was about oil. I wish I could tell you it was about Israel. No, this is about an idea.
According to investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, that idea began with a small group of conservative thinkers in Washington who believed that if the U.S. deposed Saddam Hussein, a tidal wave of democracy would roll around the world.
I wish I could tell you it was as simple as they were lying, which would be really, that would be great if they were just lying, because that would suggest some other reality that they know about.
It was a worldview that dated back to 1991 and the first war with Iraq. In the euphoria after the liberation of Kuwait, a Pentagon official named Paul Wolfowitz began working on a plan that he eventually called the Project for a New American Century, a 21st century dominated by the United States. The U.S. would use its unprecedented economic and military power to impose democratic values and protect American interests, if necessary, by preemptive force. According to this letter to then-President Bill Clinton, the trigger would be the overthrow of Saddam Hussein.
Go in there, lay it down, it rolls over. Iraq rolls over, Saddam is ousted. You get rid of the top leadership, you get a moderate Ba'athist regime, and a democracy flows out of, like water out of a fountain.
The Project for a New American Century insisted Iraq would be like Paris after the Second World War. American troops greeted as liberators.
Just go in, it's going to roll over. They believe this. They believe this. Utopian, idealist, crazy.
That manifesto was signed by a pantheon of conservative thinkers, many now familiar names. They couldn't convince Bill Clinton.
Governor, are you ready to take the oath?
But 3 years later, that would change.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
George W. Bush appointed to his new administration at least 10 of the hawks in the Project for a New American Century. Among them, Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, Rumsfeld's deputy, Paul Wolfowitz, Pentagon advisors Richard Pearl, and former CIA Director James Woolsey. Now they were locked and loaded. All they needed was a reason to pull the trigger, a crisis, as they put it in this document late in the year 2000, on the scale of Pearl Harbor.
Oh my God, there it goes! Get out of here!
Al-Qaeda just happened to take care of that. James Woolsey.
This country changed September 11th, just the way it changed December 7th of 1941. We are going to destroy our enemies.
Indeed, in his first State of the Union address after 9/11, George Bush endorsed that new world order.
The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
The next day, the hawks voiced their approval. This pronouncement from the Project for a New American Century, that at last the United States understands its role in the world. So 9/11 didn't really change everything at all. It simply provided what those in the Bush administration had been waiting for, an excuse to put their manifesto into action. And after the carnage at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the invasion of Afghanistan, headquarters of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, was an easy war to sell, both at home and abroad. But the White House had a much greater challenge: how to find a way to connect the September 11th attacks to Iraq, so they could take aim at the target they wanted most, Saddam Hussein.
Any nation that continues to harbor or support terrorism will be regarded by the United States as a hostile regime.
After the worst attacks ever on U.S. soil, George W. Bush set out not only to get even with Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, but also to get Saddam. It would require a certain disregard for the truth.
Do you believe that Saddam Hussein had connections to Al-Qaeda?
There's no evidence that he had any connections at all.
For 21 years, Robert Baer was a top CIA agent, mostly in the Middle East. After 9/11, he watched as the U.S. began to shift blame to Iraq.
There wasn't an Iraqi involved in September 11th. There's no evidence there was any connection at all. And this is, months after the war, months after we've gone through the documentation of Iraqi intelligence. And yet we go to war with Iraq. It's just, the mind boggles. For me, it does.
According to Baer, the U.S. was more than willing to ignore the true source of the terror on September 11th and in the previous several years.